And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another episode of Doing the Work, the first show on the Back Home Network dedicated to covering Indiana women's basketball. Today is our 121st episode, recorded on the evening of Wednesday, July 17th, 2024. I'm your host, Kathy Amos, joined tonight by my co-host, Jeff Marlow. And today we will be previewing one of IU's new Big Ten opponents, the Washington Huskies. This will begin a series of shows for us where we start breaking down all of the Big Ten teams and starting to look ahead to the season that, even though it may not feel like it, on July 17th, we'll get here hopefully sooner than we may think. But as usual, we will start our show today with our Hoosier Proud banner moment the same way we start all of our shows. And for me, Jeff, I'm going back to July 1st when it was announced by the Indiana women's program that Mackenzie Holmes was returning as an IU grad manager. And I'm picking this because this is yet another example of how Coach Moore and her staff have really built, again, things that we've talked about a lot, but I don't think we can talk about enough, which is that family atmosphere and really supporting each other in all of our things that we're trying to do as human beings. And in particular for Mackenzie, I think this is very important for her because she's very comfortable in Bloomington. She's been there for 5 years, basically, and she now has access to facilities to help rehab with that knee surgery that she had earlier this year, so that hopefully the next year, as the WNBA season rolls around, she'll be ready to go. And so for me, that was my banner moment, just because, again, I think it speaks very highly of how Coach Moore has really built that family atmosphere. But as always, our banner moment is brought to you by Home Field Apparel, the presenting sponsor of the entire Back Home Network, who includes Assembly Call, Crimson Cast, X's and Joe's. We have the Dribble Drive now with Austin Render. So we're just continuing to grow that Back Home Network, and Home Field Apparel has been there for a long time for us. And Home Field is constantly releasing new schools or updating their products or schools in their existing line. So you're bound to find something for you or anyone in your life that just loves great collegiate gear. And not only do you get great apparel, but you are supporting an Indiana-based business that has its roots in the Kelley School of Business. So go to homefieldapparel.com, and if it's your first order, you can use our promo code HOME23 to get 15% off your entire order. Again, that promo code is HOME23 for 15% off. The website is homefieldapparel.com. Wear one for the team. All right. Well, Jeff, I'm going to start off here with hitting some more news headlines that's happened. It's been almost a month, I think, since our last episode. So we do have a little bit, believe it or not, even though it is a little bit of a slow off season right now. So let's hit those real quick. So Coach Terry Morin did lead and was the head coach of the U18 USA women's basketball team. She led them to a gold medal in Colombia with their last win, 80-69 over Canada. As mentioned, Mackenzie Holmes is returning as an IU grad manager. IU also announced that the entire main level of both sides of Simon Scott Assembly Hall will be reserved seating for IU women's basketball now going forward. The other thing that I thought was really quite exciting and fun to see was that the Butler women's basketball program announced that they are going to be hosting Indiana on November 13th, and that game will be played in Hinkle Fieldhouse. Then last but not least, Grace Berger has signed with the Armanspor team, which is in Turkey. She is going to be playing there this upcoming winter season. Last year, Armanspor finished tied for third in the Turkish regular season. And with that, Jeff, we'll kick it over to you for Marlow's musings. What is on your mind tonight?
Well, let's go back a little bit, Kathy, to some of the news. And I think one of the things that really struck me, we saw the announcement from Butler about opening, or I should say opening, but an early game at Hinkle Fieldhouse with IU. What looks like it may very well be a season opener, but definitely early in the season. And the IU men came out and announced their non-conference schedule, their dates and things earlier at the end of last week. So I'm a little surprised actually that the IU women have not, kind of finalized and announced their non-conference schedule. Obviously, the conference schedule, we know who they're playing. We know where, there are certain games on the road, certain games at home. Dates haven't been fixed yet. And obviously the men don't have times yet, because a lot of that will depend on who's going to carry those games from the TV standpoint. One thing I didn't put in the news, and for those of you who have not noticed, and I usually drop my subscription after basketball season, but I kept it a little bit later. BTN Plus has some new subscriber models. So if you haven't been subscribing to BTN Plus here, I need to look into that. But Kathy, I think now basically they'll give you access to every Big Ten team with your subscription, rather than just simply one school at a time. So I did see that. The McKenzie news, I thought great banner moment, and interesting, because not that we've ever really talked with McKenzie. You know, we've seen her a lot in press conferences, but not one I really heard her talk a lot about coaching. And I think you hit the nail. I think you really opened my eye about something I hadn't thought about. But being in Bloomington all winter will give her a place to rehab that knee, get somebody she knows, she trusts, with the strength and conditioning staff, the medical staff, to help her rehab that knee. But usually those manager positions are things that kind of lead you down the path of coaching. And I've never really heard Mac mention kind of coaching as a future. We knew about Allie. Allie kind of was, one. I wouldn't be surprised in a few years to see a Grace Berger come back. And be on the staff to get a start there, because Grace had talked a little bit about with her a couple of times about, possibly, going into coaching when her professional career was done. So I thought that was interesting for Mac to be coming back in that position. But I thought you really opened my eyes. I hadn't thought about the fact that she could rehab. So, kudos to her. Grace, I mentioned Grace. She's, again, she's playing in the WNBA, but she's not getting a lot of time. There's been a lot of things on Twitter about free Grace Berger. And, she's had a lot of consecutive DMPs right now. But she, knowing Grace, she's still working hard, and I'm sure she's trying to keep as best an attitude as she can. But I think it'd be interesting to see how she can play over in Europe this winter. Her season last year got cut short a little bit in Spain when she injured her thumb. Basically had to come back for the surgery and rehab for that here as well. Congrats to Terry Morin and the USA team on that. And then also, about the seating. It just, again, tells you the growth of this program. Last year, we went, for the first time, we had reserve seating on both sides in the lower bowl. Now it's reserve seating in the entire lower bowl on the east and west side. The bleacher seats at both ends are still general admission seats in the lower bowl, but it's interesting that to see the demand for tickets for IU women's basketball and such. So just kind of top off your thoughts there a little bit. It's recruiting. I've tried to retweet. I know you're on the Twitter account with doing the work, but I saw a couple things, a couple highlight videos of Nevaeh Caffey, the 2025 commit coming out of Missouri here over the summer. So recruiting's been IU women's recruiting tends to be a little low key. You don't get, it doesn't generate the publicity, but it seems like IU still, in a good spot with some kids, and this will be an important year. Again, we're not looking to talk recruiting, but just the fact that, there's going to be several, Sydney, Chloe, definitely will use up their eligibility this year, and such. So Striplin, I believe, uses up her eligibility. It's going to be an important year for, from the recruiting standpoint on that side.
Yep, I agree. I think, Jeff, you hit the nail on the head with all of those. Side story, kind of funny side story. My husband and I were just gone this past weekend visiting some friends, and we got back to the airport, and the shuttle driver that took us from the airport to our car where we were parked saw the Indiana stickers on my car or whatever I have, license plate, I think it was. And he's like, "Oh, I've been watching a little bit of Indiana Fever, and I swear they have that girl that played for you at Indiana. What's her name?" And I said, "Oh, it's Grace Berger." And he goes, "Why the heck is she not playing more?" So it's not just Indiana fans that recognize that maybe Grace might hopefully get a little more run time here, but it doesn't look real promising here for the rest of the year. But well, anyway, Jeff, we are here to talk about the Washington Huskies, but a little fun thing, I think, if you have that queued up, I think we were going to premiere a song that Jared Morris from the Assembly Call put together. He was had some downtime, I guess, a few weeks ago, and was playing around with a little bit of AI. And he put together some of Mackenzie's more prominent quotes about being a Hoosier and made that into an AI song. And I think we are going to go ahead and play that here today.
this was my last game at Assembly Hall. I just really wanted to take it all in. I just want them to know how much I love them. They're the best fans in the country. And I've been so blessed every second I've gotten to play in the hall. And I'll never take those moments for granted. It's the greatest blessing in my life. I'm forever grateful to be a Hoosier. They're the best fans in the country. And I love every second we did the work. We did the work.
Yeah, I wasn't going to play the whole thing, Kathy, because for our listeners, it's about a 4-minute song that Jared has put together. So, but we're gonna kind of put it into the rotation and play little snippets of it as we go through from here on out.
Yeah, I thought that was a lot of fun. So thanks for getting that queued up for us, Jeff. And thanks to Jared, if he's listening, and getting that put together. So with that, let's go ahead and start. This is going to be our first in a series of podcasts that we do covering the other Big Ten teams. I don't think we'll go through all of the Big Ten teams. We will start by at least focusing on the 4 newest comers to the conference, with those West Coast schools that are now going to be joining us this year, mainly because I think if people are like me outside of maybe USC and UCLA, I wasn't real familiar with Washington in particular, and a little bit with Oregon, but it was really good to start diving into these and learning about some of our new opponents that will be joining. So, Jeff, I thought I'd kick it off with just a little bit overview of Washington, and then if you want, you can dive into some of the team and player stats. Does that sound cool to you?
Sounds good.
All right. So in terms of the Washington Huskies, from 2013 through 2017, they were coached by Mike Neighbors. During that time span, Washington actually went 98-41, which is a 705 average, including 47-25 or 653 in the Pac-12. That actually included as well a Final Four appearance with a star player who people might recognize his name, Kelsey Plum. So Kelsey actually went to Washington. Then Mike Neighbors left. He went to went to Arkansas. And then from there on, Washington went 25-57 or 304. And that included only 6 wins and 45 losses in 4 years under Coach Jody Wynn. Since then, they have now been coached by Tina Langley. She is going to be starting her 4th season with Washington. They have now had 2 straight winning seasons, which snapped a 5 straight losing season record that started back in 2016. Last year, they were 16-15 overall, 6-12 in the Pac-12, which got them a 10th place finish last year. Overall for her career with Washington, she's 42-46 and 15-35 in conference play. Tina coached previously at Rice for 6 seasons. That included one NCAA appearance, and she had a WNIT championship under her belt there too. Overall, during that span at Rice, she was 126-61. And additionally, she was a former Maryland assistant. So, Jeff, do you want to jump into some specifics of what Washington did last year as a team?
Yeah, I'll go back a little bit because having on the coaching side, Mike Neighbors was somebody who was really kind of, for a lot of us, the high school coaches, he had been Kevin McGuff's right-hand man. He had been at Xavier with him. He had been at Washington. Then he went out to Washington with Kevin McGuff for 2 years. And when McGuff left to get the Ohio State job, Neighbors stayed. And partly, I think, saw what was coming. I think, Kelsey Plum was on the way. They'd recruit her, and stuff. So Washington as a program is one, kind of looking back historically, Kathy, is an up and down program. They have a stretch of 4 or 5 years where they aren't very good. Then they'll find a coach who comes in for anywhere from about 2 to 5 years, and they'll be pretty decent. McGuff had a nice 2-year stretch there after he left Xavier. Neighbors had a nice stretch, but Mike Neighbors, like I was going to say, was for a lot of us. He had a newsletter that he put out to a lot of us, to high school coaches that you could get on his email list. And he had a lot of really good stuff. I don't know if he still does it now that he's down at Arkansas, but when he was an assistant, especially, there was a lot of good stuff that he put into that newsletter that he put out about once every other week. So a lot of us as high school coaches on the girls' side back then were pretty familiar with Mike Neighbors, and we're not surprised that he had some success. I think the surprise came how quickly they fell. Kelsey Plum graduates, Neighbors leaves, and they go 30% winning percentage. And that just was really, that was one. And let's face it, in the last couple of years, the Pac-12 has been loaded with UCLA,
Yeah.
USC, UCLA, and the others as well.
And even Oregon.
Yeah, and Oregon had a stretch there. Oregon State had a couple good years. So with that, Tina Langley's an interesting one, because with that assistant being a former Brenda Free's assistant at Maryland, she's got some ties to the Big Ten. So she's not coming to. It's not like she won't have an idea about some of the teams in the Big Ten or how the play is in the Big Ten. She's going to have, she'll have a pretty good idea. And I want to talk a little bit about that later. But going back to last year, this was a team that did not play. And we'll talk a little bit about it at the end as well. This is not an up and down team. They are about middle of the pack in tempo. They offensively, they averaged 64.2, which put them pretty much dead middle in the pack of Division I last year. They gave up 59 a game, which was 45th out of 360 Division I teams. So they were in the, pretty good. I hate to say above average, but above average defensive team. Tempo is what I was saying. They ranked 331st. In tempo. So they're not an up and down team. Offensively, they were rated 101st. Their defensive rating was 41st. These are numbers I think they're going to kind of come back to haunt them, because looking back over a couple years, I didn't see a whole lot of improvement. 42% on field goals, 32. I'm going to round this up. 32% on threes, 70% at the free throw line. Their opponents, though, only shot 39%, 29% beyond the arc, 70% at the free throw line. They don't turn it over a lot, 13.6 a game, and forced 14.2. They were I'll call it +2 on the glass. They average about 36 rebounds a game from a team perspective. So, Kathy, before I hit the individuals, just get some of your thoughts on the team.
Yeah, when I was kind of reading through those and doing some research as well, kind of preparing it, it kind of felt a little bit to me that their calling card is defense. Yep. Which maybe we equate that to Indiana, but I think the important here thing to distinguish them from Indiana is their tempo. So while maybe, yes, defensively, that's something they really have as one of their calling cards, the tempo of 331 out of 360, that one was really surprising to me. I knew offensively, they weren't real strong with only a 42% field goal percentage. You knew that they probably weren't really strong on an offensive mind, and points per game. They only averaged 64 points per game last year as well, which, contrasts that to Indiana, which I think we ended up in the high 80s last year. So quite a big difference, I think, here in philosophy in terms of offensively. I didn't get a chance to really watch any of their play, so I'm only going off of statistics here. But, it'd be interesting to see how their defensive style, while maybe they do hold their opponents to some of the same kind of numbers that maybe we are expecting, is it the same kind of defensive style that we have seen from Indiana and some of the other Big Ten teams that kind of been known for defense? So if you've been able to watch anything, Jeff, I'd be curious to your thoughts in terms of just overall defensive philosophy. Is it kind of a similar method, or is it quite different?
I again had not really got down to watching anything, Kathy. I'm with you on that. But again, they only gave up 59. And in a Pac-12 that has some pretty good offensive teams with Utah, USC, UCLA, among others. So they're doing something right on the defensive end. And again, I know tempo plays a part of it, but still, and that's the thing. You talk about IU, where IU's average scoring margin is much more than 5 points. But this is also the difference between an IU team that's winning almost 30 games compared to a team that won 16. Those are things. I'm going to hit a few of the players here and there. I'll throw it back to you, get your thoughts on them. I hate to say led, because I don't know enough about them to know whether one player or another stands out for them in terms of use. Like that's their alpha, but I'm going to go with Delea Daniel, 6'4" senior forward, 2-time honorable mention All Pac-12. She's been in last year, she was an honorable mention all defensive team. She made the WNIT all tournament team in 22-23 when they made a pretty deep run 2 years ago in the WNIT. She had 2 seasons at Cal where she was on the Pac-12 freshman team. She was a McDonald's All-American and the number 13 recruit coming out of high school by ESPN. And she's a Seattle native. So, spent a couple years at Cal, came back home. She averaged 12 points a game, 7 rebounds, 2 assists, 1 steal. only shot 44%, 24% from three, and 64% at the line. So for a 6'4" forward, she really didn't have a high shooting percentage. The other one that I want to kind of get thoughts on real quick, Kathy, before I move on to the guards or some of the others. This one is a guard, Elle Ladine, L-E-L-L-E. Ladine, 5'11" junior guard. She was Pac-12 honorable mention. She was the number 53 recruit coming out of high school by ESPN, San Francisco, California, Northern California kid. Again, about we'll call 11.6 points per game, 5 rebounds, 2 assists. Again, 44% on field goals, 33% on threes, 82% at the line. And then Hannah Steins, I'll go down to Hannah real quick, 5'11" junior guard. She averaged 9 points a game last year, 5 rebounds, 2.5 assists, a steal, 42%, field goal, 32% on three, 77% from the line. She was the number 39 recruit by ESPN coming out of high school out of the Orange County, California area, Southern Cal. So they've got kids who were high recruits. Makes me wonder a little bit if to a certain degree at Washington right now, part of their issue is kind of trying to fit round pegs into square holes, because they've got, it seems like talent, but it's not showing up per se in the stats and in the win column.
Yeah, that's what I kind of wonder too. You know, they are getting, it'll be interesting to see what they have this year, right? So you talked about Delilah and Elle and Hannah. Those are 3 of their top 4 scorers from last year. And then, you know, I know we'll get into a little more probably that you might want to add some, but they do have some nice transfers coming in. They do have Tyra Eek from Eastern Michigan. She is a center, so kind of starting to fill in the bigger positions there, where she was averaging just under 10 points per game and 7 rebounds per game. And then they also have a nice transfer in Brenna McDonald, a forward from Yale. And at Yale, she averaged 10.8 points per game and just at 7 rebounds per game. So, you know, it looks like, at least from a transfer perspective, they might be trying to fill some of those holes as well with some of the transfers that, you know, which is what that transfer portal is for. So, you know, getting in a couple of forwards, a center, to go along with, you know, a returning couple of guards and another forward in Delilah Daniels. So it'll be really interesting to see if, you know, they start putting those pieces together a little bit more. You know, I wonder if it, you know, after those 4 or 5 down years that we talked about at the beginning of our coverage of them, if it made it a little harder for them to recruit and to get some folks in. And so now they're starting to do that. And, you know, I'll let you talk here in a little bit about their freshmen coming in, but maybe they're starting to put it together. That didn't seem they had any transfer outs that I could find, at least, and which speaks to me again of being able to keep folks in, which we saw with Indiana this year, being able to keep everybody staying in. They only graduated 1 person last year out of their starting at least main 3 with Lauren Schwartz. She did average 12 points per game last year for them. So we'll be interested to see if one of those transfers or maybe even Hannah will be able to step up. But yes, it looked like to me they were able to keep, for the most part, their team intact from the previous year in terms of not losing hardly anyone. Only one I saw was 1 transfer out, who was Ari Long. Interesting. We'll talk about her in 2 weeks because she went to Oregon. So what else do you have in terms of individual plays for Washington?
Well, they also had a girl named Jada Noble who transferred out to Cal. So, you know, another, you know, who was former Pac-12. I like, you know, you brought up McDonald, you brought up Iki. I guess I still have a feeling of, and I'm not trying to be a snob about it. It's just like, let's see how somebody goes from the MAC into the Big Ten. You know, we kind of, you go back to the men's side a little bit last year, you know, and I know it's apples and oranges, but Peyton Sparks, didn't ever seem to fit. It was all MAC, you know, but it didn't really ever seem to fit into the concept the IU men had last year. So let's see how that works out. The one thing that they did lose, like you said, Lauren Schwartz graduated, but they seemed to go heavy on the portal. They really went after bigs. And that was one of the things I was going to talk a little bit about as we wrapped it up a little bit. So it tells me that she thinks she needs size in the Big Ten, that, you know, she needs to get more, you know, more size, more depth up front for the Big Ten. And I think that's an interesting concept as she went through the portal. There, one freshman last year who really provided a spark for them was Sevilla Sellers, 5'7" sophomore guard. She was on the Pac-12 freshman team. 8.5 rebounds, 8.5 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists, 1.5 steals. Only shot 40%, but again, freshmen sometimes can have some of those struggles. 30% on three, 74% free throw line. Anchorage native, she was the number 28 recruit 2 years ago by ESPN. So again, these are some solid, at least by the numbers, some solid recruits when you look in terms of where they were in their classes. Their one incoming freshman this year is Devin Coppinger, 5'10" freshman guard. Again, another Seattle native here. She's the number 35 recruit, 4-star by ESPN, 2-time state champion in Washington, but she's the only incoming high school recruit that I could find on the roster. So, but again, so picked up a guard in Coppinger, and they were fairly guard heavy with what they had coming back. So, with that, so Kathy, what do you think maybe per se about some of their guards like Steins and Sellers, and especially Steins and Sellers? They're coming back, but you throw in somebody like Coppinger.
Yeah, I think it'll be an interesting mix. And just like you mentioned, how is a freshman step up for them with Coppinger, even if she is, top 35 recruit and a 4-star, that doesn't necessarily mean that, you can just jump in and be able to play right away. And I think especially jumping into the Big Ten right away is, going to be an interesting challenge for them because, I think we have quite a few teams already in the Big Ten that are pretty defensively minded. I know we always talk about Indiana, but they're not the only ones. Ohio State as well, and quite a few of our other teams. And, looking back at their schedule last year, they've just really, and we've already talked about it, they only averaged 64 points as a team. They really just didn't put up many points against even some of their non-conference, opponents. Right. So you would think that at least their points per game might have been brought up by their non-conference schedule, playing Idaho State and Air Force and Hawaii and teams that maybe you would expect to be a little bit higher scoring for them. The highest one that I can see is against Air Force, where they scored 73 points in their non-conference. But most of the time, they're just really, really down there. They only were able to put up, 44 points against UCLA. So once they really started getting into the heat of the big, the Pac-12, 59 against Stanford, 59 against Washington State, 62 against Arizona, they just really struggled to put up any kind of points. So they first of all couldn't do it well in their non-conference. It appears to me. I'm sorry, I missed a couple here. They did put up 113 against North Carolina Central, but beyond that, they were mostly down in those 70s or lower. So to me, it just is interesting to see how that's going to translate, especially now with a really tough travel schedule and Big Ten schedule, in a completely different style of play. And even though maybe, Coach Langley coached before underneath Brenda Fries, that doesn't mean that she's got the pieces yet to quite put it together. So I think it would be very interesting to see how this slower tempo and really try to grind out possession kind of style of play that it seems, at least from what I can see on paper, really translates into the Big Ten, because it didn't quite translate quite so well for the Pac-12 as we saw with only 6 wins for them last year. Jeff, you might be muted.
And one thing I'll go back to Sellers real quick is that she may be one of those types of players that can give us some issues. And what I did read a little bit about her because she kind of piqued my interest. Kind of quick guard off the bounce. And so again, that's been the kind of player that has really given us some fits in terms of keeping them in front of. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And Kathy, we talked a little bit about this already, but what I saw, kind of my original, my overall thoughts, slow tempo. We're going to grind out possessions, as you said already. I'm not sure they're very good shooters based on percentage. And so, and I had kind of noted above average defense, but are they really above average defensively, or is that just a byproduct of tempo where they're going to sit, make every possession, a 25, 30 second possession where you're just not going to get enough of those possessions
Yeah.
maybe to show some of their warts on the defensive end. I guess I should put it that way. As I said earlier, they've added some bigs in the portal. They still seem a little thin at a wing and guard, but again, those are a chance for, especially look at somebody like Sellers, especially going to be a sophomore. You look at Steins and possibly Coppinger. That if they get some improvement out of those, or Coppinger comes in and plays like an All-American freshman, then all of a sudden they're going to be a little bit better. This is one game. I'll remind our fans, this is a game that we only play them once. It will be out in Seattle. So Kathy and I may be having to do this one the day after. I don't think we're going to do any late. We're not
Unless
planning on doing any
tip.
Yeah, we're not planning on any post-game shows at midnight.
That's right.
So anyway, but yeah, just kind of get your overall thoughts about the Huskies. Again, interesting because this is not a team we're used to talking about, but here they are now, a conference opponent.
Yeah, and as you look again, candidly going off of on paper and looking at their schedule, I don't know that you definitely. We can't just sleep on them either. As we mentioned, they do have a number of pieces coming back of some of their core players. They have some, nice incoming transfers, and they took 3 teams to some overtime games that ended up losing all 3 of them. But they did take number 6 Stanford at the time to overtime and lost by 4. They took Arizona State into double overtime, lost by 7 there, and then played Arizona at Arizona triple overtime and ended up losing that one there too. So, if they can just figure out how to get some of those wins in some of these closer games, I think it's okay. It's some of the other games where you might think that, or maybe they, in terms of the defense, they held USC as an example. Actually, they beat USC last year 62-59. So I don't think this is a team that, if just because we look at them and say, well, on paper, they have a slow tempo and they really grind it out. There were some really close games that they ended up losing last year that kind of made their record, it seems, a little bit worse than maybe at least in reality, they really were. So I think this is a team we'll really want to watch early on into the conference season, depending on when we get them, and reevaluate what we're kind of thinking of Washington. I'm not quite sure, again, not having seen them, what to quite make out from them with some of the wins, but yet some of the stats they put up. But I think for us in other teams in the Big Ten, the answer is going to be, what can you end up putting up against Washington, and how can you speed that tempo up and get them out of what they're wanting to play?
Yeah, and if you're Tina Langley, Kathy, you brought up some good points there about their schedule in terms of those close losses. That shows you maybe a little bit of youth and inexperience, even though you had a couple of veterans in Schwartz and Ladine and Daniels, but again, not used to winning to a ton. But if you win those 3 games, you're 9-9 in the league. More than you're roughly 9-9 in the league. You're 9-9 in the league. 19 wins overall. Might have been in the tournament. If you win those 3 that you talked about, I mean, they might have, at least would have been squarely on the bubble. With that, so I'm sure Tina Langley's trying to get her program, her kids in her program, to be like, look, we're not as far away as the record indicates. We played these 3 teams tough. If we'd won those, if we find a way to do that more consistently, we're right there. And again, kind of that same thing. If you can get into the top 10 in the Big Ten now, you're going to at least be on the bubble.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good. Well, Jeff, those are kind of my final thoughts, but do you have any additional final thoughts on Washington and how they might fit into the Big Ten? Not having seen them a whole lot yet.
I don't really know. And that's kind of was where I was going with those, the comments I just made, kind of wrapping it up. It's going to be fun. I will admit this. Yeah. It's going to be kind of fun to see some newer teams. I'm not a big fan of the expansion. Let me admit that. I'm still an old traditionalist. I wish we could kind of get back to the original Big Ten, but I know that's not going to happen. We're not going backwards, and more than likely we're going to keep seeing some more movement and changes in the conference alignment as we go along. It's all being driven by football and the money that, those contracts can get. I mean, you look at what the Big Ten got out of Fox and NBC and CBS for their contract for this next few years. It's outrageous. I mean, I shouldn't say outrageous, but outrageous sum of money in terms of how much each school is going to bring in. from that standpoint. So I'm excited. I've always, Washington's always been one of those schools that I'm not necessarily like, oh my God, I'm a Washington fan, but it's always one of those schools. I don't know whether it's because of the color scheme or whether because, out there in Seattle where it really never snows, you would think it's like sometimes you're going to be bitterly cold, but it's really, it hardly ever snows. Now it might rain on you 3 out of 5 days, 3 out of 5 days every week. But it's just always been one of those schools that kind of has intrigued me when I watch them play late at night on TV or whatever, from that. So I'm excited to see them come in. And again, and I agree with you. My final thought, I agree with you. Do not take them lightly. You're going to go out there on the road. You're going to go, well, for Bloomington, it's going to be 3 time zones. All right. You're going to be going 3 time zones away to play. And you don't want to take them lightly and go out there and, step on your tongue and come out of there with a loss. This is one you got to go out there and get a win. I don't care. They can be better, but this is one when we go to get toward the beginning of the season, we kind of go through the schedule and chalk up wins. This is one I'm chalking up to be a win.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is, even though it's on the road, I think it is definitely one that we'll want to put in that W column.
Oops.
All right. And with that, we'll talk about what is upcoming next for Doing the Work. Our next show will be in 2 weeks. We'll try to get back on to our 2 weeks cadence with the holidays and some travel. Jeff and I just weren't able to get one to you guys here before today within the month. So, but we are definitely looking at July 21st. And at that point, we will be spotlighting Oregon. So again, continuing down the coast, we started up north with Washington. We'll continue on to Oregon and we'll continue on down to the LA schools after that. So hopefully you'll be able to join us here on July 31st. If you do want to see us do the show live and be part of our live chat, make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@BackHomeNetwork. You can also be part of our private community as well. Find out more at assemblycall.substack.com. A special thanks to John Ringer of Riggs Design for designing all of our logo. And a big thank you to Bob Thompson for the music that you heard throughout the broadcast. And I guess now Jared Morris as well for throwing in some music for us as well. But most of all, thank you, listeners, for being with us tonight or listening afterwards on your podcast just delivery system of choice. We will be back with you again in 2 weeks to talk IU hoops. Until then, keep your elbow in, your eyes on the rim, and let's go Hoosiers. All right. Great.
How about that? Less than 40 minutes.
Look at us go.
Like we know what
We'll
we're
see
doing.
when we get to like USC and UCLA, they might get a little longer, but yes.
Yeah, well, they probably deserve a little bit longer too.
Probably do, for sure. Well, even with Oregon starting to look a little preview ahead of them, they might be an interesting one to cover as well. They've got a lot of moving pieces compared to Washington. So
yeah,
that's my teaser, everyone, for the next show in 2 weeks. So
be interested to see about Oregon. You would think with that Nike money that they would, especially after that run they had with INSQ and stuff, that they wouldn't fall off as badly as they have the last few years.
Yep.
So, all right, Kathy,
well,
I will let you go.
Yep. Thank you, everybody, for being there. And Jeff, we'll see you in a couple weeks. Take care.
See you guys.